Hey, everybody, it's Doug Green, and I'm the publisher of Technology Reseller News. And I'm very pleased to have with us again Ray Pasquale, who's the CEO of Unified Office. Ray, thank you for joining me today.
Happy to be here, Doug, as always.
So, we started out today. We were going to do a podcast on some news you're having that's coming up at IT Expo, which is fast approaching. But we ended up actually starting to talk about some other news. And I thought maybe we should do a separate podcast about that. Recently, California POC had a decision that seems to maybe undermine a rule and an order that we've all lived with for years. And Ray, maybe we can start with that. At the dawn of VoIP, Jeff Pulver went and got an order done, and we've lived under it ever since. What's that all about?
The 2004 Pulver Order, right? That was the sort of free world dial-up, I think was the name of the company that he had developed. And it was under Michael Powell's leadership so the carriers were trying to regulate all VoIP companies back then. And Jeff made the argument that, I don't know exact argument, you can look it up, the argument that was antitrust, anti-trade, right, whatever. And the FCC went along with Jeff. And it was that at that point that said, let VoIP companies prosper and not regulate them. And of course, that creates competition, right, amongst the big operators. So that was 2004, I believe. And recently, there's been a spate of what I call aggressive regulatory actions. And that started with the Trace Act in Congress, where stir shaken became a thing. Obviously, as all things tend to happen or begin, it was always the unintended look. They wanted to do good for the people. They wanted to eliminate robocalls and all this stuff. But unintended consequences of, pushing these large regulatory burdens on small companies. Most of these voice over IP companies that I'm aware of in the United States are very small operators to a large degree. The regulatory burden placed on a company like mine to comply with stir shaken and robocall mitigation and filing all these plans, and not to mention part of that cost is legal. I mean, you've got to hire lawyers that, in Washington that know how to navigate this stuff, and they don't work for free. So it costs a lot of money. And if you don't have your own engineering staff, I do. Plus, we have the luxury of having a lot of expertise in both telecom, data networking, and voice communications here in my company. A lot of companies don't have that. So we developed our own stir shaken applications, for example. We sign our own calls. We do our own 10 DLC sort of compliance efforts. I guess my point is, this stuff all came out of the Trace Act. This is all meant to be good stuff for consumers.
Right.
Places an unduly burden on companies like mine. So that's where it starts. And recently, the California PUC, I'm looking at my whiteboard over here. The California PUC decided we're going to regulate VoIP companies starting in 2025. Basically, flying in the face of the Pulver Order. And to their description of what a VoIP company is two types. One is nomadic and one is fixed. The distinction between the two are somewhat murky because, as we talked about earlier before we started streaming this, VoIP in general is a nomadic service, or at least it should be. That's why it was developed. So for the luxury of doing business in the state of California next year, unless this gets appealed, which it might under the new administration, companies like mine have to pay $25,000 to be regulated. And we don't know what that is yet. The regulatory framework really isn't in place on what they're going to do to regulate us yet. So I can't say it right now with any degree of certainty and tell you that, it's not going to be a big deal, Doug, right? We don't know. So you couple that with the recent robocall mitigation enforcement actions at the FCC, 2,411 voice over IP companies that they know of that ran afoul of either not producing a mitigation plan or producing one and not adhering to it. I would tell you that most of these companies probably have no idea what their customers are doing. I know in our case, we have software safeguards built into our product that do not allow auto dialers, for example, and things of that nature. So I'm a little skeptical here that this is all for the good of commerce in general. My cynical side of me says this could be an effort on behalf of the large carriers like the Sprints, and I don't want to actually name them, whether or not this is intended to sort of stem competition. How's that?
Right. Well, Ray, let's back up for a second, because there's a lot here to think about. So at the dawn of VoIP, and I have a feeling that not all of our readers are like us, that we actually trace ourselves back professionally to, knowing and living and breathing the days of the early 90s when
I'm still a young guy, Doug.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. Being 39 is wonderful, isn't it? So, when we look back, what Jeff Pulver and other people managed to do at the time was they created a very stable regulatory environment of limited regulation. And in that environment came investment. People were confident they could put money into VoIP companies. And basically, the market was being left alone. It was also, to your point, not taxed or feed or in some other way. There weren't huge barriers to entry. So I think what you're telling me is there's a consequence when you layer on these possible consumer protections. They may be well intended. You're saying there creates a barrier to entry which inhibits competition.
I believe so.
Smaller companies.
It's a law of unintended consequences, right?
Right.
I mean, the FCC, these bureaucrats, they're really these big giants just roaming the earth, and they kind of step on things.
Right.
And oops, I'm sorry to have stepped and squished you, but I mean, that's kind of.
And
I'm not suggesting that's going to happen, but I really don't know. But there's the confluence of all these things starting to happen at once has really got my. I know in my company what we have to do to adhere to these regulations. And by the way, a lot of companies are depending on third-party companies to handle this for them.
Right.
And one of the recent rulings in the California PUC order says, no, that's not an excuse. If the company that you're using to help you meet these regulations are not doing it adequately, you also can be punished. And so I don't know. Things don't seem quite right to me at the moment.
All right. Now, Ray, let me go at this the other way, because I think it's worth thinking about for all of us. Is there an alternative path to achieve those consumer protections and still not create such a big barrier that we can have the competition we've had?
I can't speak about the PUC ruling in California, but I can speak about robocalling.
Right.
Everybody's perfectly happy and capable to not answer their phone.
Right. Okay.
If you see somebody calling that you don't want to talk to, you don't answer it. So the free market can fix that, right? If robocalls weren't being answered, they'd stop doing it.
Right. Now, well, okay, but on the other hand, I'm going to stay with the other side, what's pushing this, right? Mm-hmm. So the other what the political force, and again, I'm not talking about parties, I'm talking about consumers in general.
Yeah, I understand.
Most consumers probably, if they're thinking about this at some point, have said, why isn't the state of Oregon, the state of California, the state of confusion, wherever, right? Stepping in and preventing, why am I being bothered by these robocalls? Another more maybe higher issue would be, has robocalling so impacted us that legitimate calls, so I hear about this from a lot of companies all the time, the Kaiser Permanentes, the legacies, the large medical carriers, there's organizations that want to talk to you or collect money, or there's all sorts of legitimate reasons to be out there, right? Contact centers and so on. Right. Aren't they undermined by the robocalling?
I don't think robocalling is actually the biggest problem.
Okay.
I think the biggest problem, what you just discussed, what you just said, and I heard this from my customers 2 years ago. A lot of my big auto dealership customers in the Mid-Atlantic states complained to us that for whatever reason, their customers weren't answering the phones and they were calling them to come pick up their car or to schedule an appointment.
Right.
They didn't know why. So I guess several of the customers walked into the dealership and they asked them, why aren't you answering your phone when we call? He says, well, it says spam likely. Why would I answer a call that says spam likely?
Right.
So the mislabeling, I didn't put that label in there. I put the name of the auto dealership, registered it with the proper CNAM databases that the carriers are supposed to dip. We did not know here why that name was getting relabeled. And we discovered that there was a third-party system companies, rather, ecosystem of companies that were hired by the major carriers to run analytics on everybody's phone calls to make a determination as to whether this call was accurately labeled or not. And if they decided it wasn't, they would just rewrite the label that I put in there. When I discovered that, I went to Washington and I responded to an order and then testified at the FCC last year. And, as is typically the case, you just don't want to go to Washington and complain about things, which a lot of people would probably, enjoy doing, but you've got to be constructive at the same time.
Right.
And we produced what I think is a very, very solid recommendation that requires very little effort to fix, that would benefit everybody. But as is typically the case, there's an ecosystem of companies that don't want to go away, that want to take advantage of this mislabeling. They profit from it, right? So there's no incentive to really fix it in a general sense. It hurts the public confidence and faith,
right,
in a legitimate phone call. That's really what is toxic to the market. I don't know about robocalling per se. I don't get a lot of those calls. I'm sure they exist. But the mislabeling problem is the biggest problem my customers face. Carnival Cruise Lines filed a complaint to the FCC that they couldn't reach their customers to tell them, look, we're going to leave earlier than normal. There's a hurricane coming. So that is the biggest problem, right, in my mind.
So Ray, is there an alternative path that you are recommending?
Yeah. So our ask at the FCC when we testified, a year ago, May, was that when a call that we generate, first of all, we asked, do not change the label that I've supplied in the CNAM database. Do not relabel it as spam. You can run your analytics on it and have a little flag indicator that says this call could be spam, but don't change Doug Green's name to spam likely. Leave it alone. And then the terminating carrier notify us, the originating carrier, with a traceback message. There is provisions in the SIP RFC under discussion to do just that. So now at least you've notified me that that call is, could be problematic. Now I can go to my customer to find out what is happening and seek remedy. What that also does is if you ignore that and I continue to keep sending you those calls, I proposed a handful of punitive actions that might be much to my dismay, but I felt I had to stop it from happening. But right now, there's no traceback indication as to whether or not my calls are getting mislabeled. I have no idea until one of my customers comes and complains to me that their calls are going unanswered. Very simple. That's a very simple, I believe, solution to this problem. I'm not getting register shaken. I'm not giving up on that. I'm just saying notification back to the OSB that my calls have been relabeled, and then let me do something about it. And if I don't, you'll know, and then you can take enforcement actions. To me, that solves a great deal of these issues. I'm a free market guy, right? I'm not a big regulatory guy. I believe that the free markets can solve lots of problems if given the chance. And the Pulver Order was a great example of that. Without that, I don't know where we'd be today. Certainly, a lot of innovation never would have happened.
Right, and what you're doing is you're raising the counter argument to this. Is it sounds good. Consumers we're possibly being protected. It also could hurt consumers because if the competition doesn't happen, prices go up, and oligopolistic practices are enhanced. I think is that your argument?
Yeah, back to monopolies again.
Right.
Yeah.
So as we peer into no one knows the future, but are we in fact in a position where we are potentially being re-regulated? Is that actually happening? We
are at the moment. My hope is that the incoming commissioner at the FCC after the inauguration in January I don't know a whole lot about him, but I think he's a lot about free speech, and I think there's an appetite there to sort of not regulate VoIP companies. I don't know what's going to happen. We've got to wait this out. Once that happens, I will be going back to Washington with a team to meet with him. And maybe the Vaughn Coalition, I think there's some rumblings there that they're waiting as well. And they may decide to try to appeal the decision in California. I don't know, but something has to happen because this is just the beginning. If California succeeds, then you're going to see Illinois, Massachusetts, you name the number of states that'll also play this game, and that would not be good. That definitely would not be good.
Ray, we could be talking about this for the next 3 hours. There's a lot on the table. There's a lot of to discuss here. But for now, I want to thank you for joining me today for this live podcast. Where can we learn more about this issue and also about your company, Unified Office?
Well, you can learn about my company, unifiedoffice.com, and all you need to do is Google the California PUC decision and anything about Stir Shake, and including an article that was written about my appearance, which I thought was a very good blog article written by TMC Net.
Yep, our good friends at TMC, Rich Tarani, will make sure that there's a link to that in to this the companion piece to this podcast. Ray, I want to thank you for joining me today. This has been great. I look forward to our next one.
Thanks a lot, Doug. Good to see you again.